Welcome to the Stripping the Dipping podcast for the penultimate summer series episode. You're joined by your usual explosive co-host, AMG Cool Running Dance. It's a great movie. With a week left over until we resume the F1 2022 championship, we're shifting into gear and accelerating towards the triple header in Spa, Zandvoort, and the Temple of Speed at Monza. So who better to dissect the championship with other than Mr. Ferrari himself? And no, I don't mean Mr. Enzo. He's a great friend of the show, a connoisseur in all walks of motorsport, and a host of the awesome 9 o'clock meeting segment on his YouTube channel. He's the one and only David Noble. David, I hope you enjoyed that intro. And how's everything going? What have you been up to during the summer break when the racing's not been so active?
Well, yeah, no, thank you. Awesome intro as always. I aspire to be as slick as you are at these things.
Excellent,
Yeah,
excellent.
no, yeah. No, it's been keeping busy, obviously, during the racing summer break. We were at Snetterton last weekend in theory, for the British touring car. But what actually happened was I'd forgotten how busy touring car events are because I'd not been for a few years. And you couldn't swing an earwig at Snetterton in like the areas where you're supposed to watch the racing and stuff from. So I watched very, very little racing that day at all.
Oh,
Um,
no. Mhm.
well, the problem is because I'm used to being at like GT events, at British GT and stuff like that. You know, where you have like an hour-long format race, so you have less races going on, so you can you'll be there and you can like watch a bit of it and then move to another bit and watch a bit of that. And then, if like there's something going on in the paddock area, like, whatever support series about to roll out or whatever, you can go and see them doing that or get a couple of autographs or whatever before then going back to watch the end of the race or something. But because with BTCC, it's like 20-minute race, 20-minute race, 20-minute race, 20-minute race, and they're all sort of like right on top of each other. It's like by the time you've seen the podium for one, you've missed half the race for the other before you could even get to like the grandstand watching area for it. I had completely forgotten how manic that is, and of course it was like stupidly hot as well. So I've tried to record all this footage and stuff from it, and it's just like I'm red in so much of it.
Oh, I could imagine, David. And again, I'm super excited to have you on today's episode too, because I feel you're one of the special guests we have, which has that insight of going to so many different kind of races as well throughout the season, checking out different motorsport disciplines as well as you mentioned the British Touring Car Championship, which in here, like over here, is a huge stable of motor racing and so forth as well. So it'd be so great to explore your perspectives and to give our viewers and listeners insight into that as well. So as always, David, what I like to do is try and build a portfolio or like almost a profile of all of our special guests. So the question I always start off with, David, is like, what got you into following motor racing? We know that you're a loyal Ferrari supporter, and you have to when it comes to being a Ferrari fan, as Georgina teased backstage. And on the topic
Yep.
of that as well, when you think of the prancing horse, what comes to your mind?
Oh, history. This the when you see like at Monza or whatever else, in front of the stadium and stadium podium and just the flags, the singing, the sea of people, it's a madness in every way. I mean, I don't think there's something chaotic about Ferrari, and I think that just sort of kind of appeals to human nature to a certain extent. Because it's like so many businesses or professional teams are clinical and slick and a bit machine-like almost. Whereas with Ferrari, it's kind of alive and vibrant, and they bleed red, literally. I, I when I what it comes down to is when I was a kid, I was about 8 years old or whatever else. My stepdad got this Scalextric thing for Christmas, and it was like the set with like the black Ayrton Senna Lotus and like the FW11 Williams, and great, brilliant. And I remember watching racing with my stepdad. It was about the only thing we ever talked about, but that was what we did. Uh, so I've got all these memories of all these things that have happened in the 1980s. But as I've grown up, I've realised I've no idea whether I actually watched them at all, or whether it's just because I remember seeing them and I remember in my brain I was watching it at that time. I must have seen it. So I sort of inserted all these racing moments into my brain. But it's like, but was I at like 10 years old really getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to watch the Japanese Grand Prix? Probably not. So it's that kind of thing. But what I always remember about it though was at the time the two dominant teams, absolutely dominant. Each having about 2 or 3 years spells where they were very difficult to beat. Was Williams and McLaren. And, as a kid, I didn't know the history between the those teams. I didn't know how they'd got to be in that position, the faces, the people, the leaders that had come and gone through them, where the names or even whatever came from. What I knew was there were these two huge teams who were utterly dominant, and I wanted to see someone beat them. It's pretty much what it came down to. Because McLaren, especially, always felt a little bit clinical. And to be honest, they up until quite recently, they still kind of did. But, as an adult, obviously, I've found out more about the team, so it's like, I've warmed to them now, it's like I have absolute and utter respect for McLaren, Williams, all the teams that have basically been in Formula One, because if you're committing to something like that, that's serious commitment, um, even like with the Mercedes guys, you can trace their history all the way back to Tyrrell, like 1969. There's a flow, there's a pattern. Even though we think of Mercedes, the race team, as being a new team, it isn't. It has history. And then if you think of the Mercedes as the brand in racing, they can trace their Grand Prix roots right back to the very, very early 20th century. Say one of the first car maker. So it's all the, you can watch it for the racing, you can watch it because you like X Driver or whatever else. Whatever reason people come into it, but there's always so much more to learn, so much more to find out about, so much more to. It's a open book all the time, So I just love it. You know, I love racing. I love watching the cars. I love trying to meet whatever young driver and get the autograph for my son's collection. I'm pretty sure I'm far more bothered about it than he is. Um, but yeah,
No, I
um,
think that's a great
so,
insight as well, David. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. And kind of thinking about that as well, you mentioned just like the nature of the teams, because you have the likes of like McLaren, for example, which I also agree with you in terms of when I was growing up watching them anyways. Like I was a huge Shimi fan. My dad as well was a huge Schumacher fan as well. And watching basically Ferrari go up against McLaren and Ron Dennis in particular, a very imposing figure, you can kind of see
yeah,
that kind of commercially astute, kind of very regimented, strict kind of thing that they had there at McLaren during Mika Hakkonen's day, even before that during Senna's day, and even kind of more modernly with the kind of Lewis Hamilton, Jenson Button era as well. So I could definitely kind of see that kind of like behavior. Whereas going to Ferrari as well, you mentioned just the passion and just just even just how Ferrari was incepted with the story of Enzo Ferrari, kind of his thoughts as well in motor racing and some of the famous quotes that we know today, like it doesn't matter what's behind you, only in front, or the engine is supposed to pull the car, not push it. When he was talking about front
mm.
engine and rear
Well,
engine layouts.
that's the thing is the horse pulls the cart, not pushes it. Yeah, but the thing is, Enzo quotes are always taken completely out of like context because we look at them as we do now with the knowledge that we have now and whatever. Enzo started racing in the 1920s. It's like, of course, any statements he makes is going to be based on ideas and stuff formed 100 years ago.
Sure.
So it has to, you have to sort of take some of his quotes and stuff into context. My favorite one for that was like people where go on about the one where it's like, people who like aerodynamics can't build engines and stuff, and we laugh about that now. But the thing is, when he said that in like the 1960s and stuff, the garagistas and whatever, none of them made their own engines, so he's factually correct.
Sure. Absolutely, and like you mentioned as well, like he lived during a time which I think if you were to compare it by today's world and technology and innovation, they're so vastly different. But having said that, what he kind of did during his time, his innovation, his mindset, just as like a brand and company for what he stood for, it set the foundations of what teams aspire to be today and the legacy that they want to try and create, such as Ferrari. And on that topic as well, David, the first kind of question I want to throw to you as well, just on the historic kind of vibe is, who are your favorite three drivers to drive for the legendary brand?
Well, I don't know if the three of them would get on, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
I mean, if we talk,
was a
are
start.
we talking historically Ferrari drivers, or are we talking drivers in general?
I'll give you two Ferrari drivers that have driven for the brand at any stage, and I'll give you one, just any team, any they could have driven for any team.
Okay. Well, the two Ferrari drivers are easy. That's Michael Schumacher and Gilles Villeneuve. Beyond that, who else?
Jody
I mean,
Scheckter, Alan
the
Prost, or the
yeah,
people kind
I
of
mean
like see as Williams guy.
the Ferrari roster's massive, but you said I could only have two ex-Ferrari drivers, so I'd say Ayrton Senna.
Yeah, and I
But I
think
mean, can you imagine them three in what sharing the Ferrari over a season? I
oh,
mean, that could end badly.
but it'd be just glorious though, David, because when you
It
think about the
would be it'd
three
be wonderful to
personalities.
watch, yes.
Exactly, because I mean, like people that document Enzo Ferrari's life always say that of the bunch that he obviously had at the time in the stable, Jules Villeneuve was his favorite, and you could understand why, because Jules was just an out and out racer, really took his craft quite seriously, driving the car on the limit. And almost you knew whatever result he got with the car, that was probably the maximum it could have got.
Yeah,
So there is that. Obviously, Senna as well. I feel also kind of like falls into that kind of thoroughbred kind of generation of this out and out
yeah.
racers, and he was fearless and
Senna's
so
always
talented.
kind of the one that got away to a certain extent, as in, like, Ferrari would have liked to have had him at some point, but it never quite worked out.
Of course, but imagine just the passion and just the two kind of like, entities fusing together as well. That'd be crazy. And then, and even in
Mm.
modern day history, like, and that's probably a good segue for the next topic we're going to get onto shortly. But, the work that Michael Schumacher did as well with Ferrari in that kind of like John Todd, Ross Brawn, Rory, I think it was it
Rory Byrne.
Rory Burns one? Yeah, there we go. I knew the name was going to try and elude me. But again, just what they created there too, because people have a narrative against Michael that, oh well, he only won championships at Ferrari because they're the dominant car. But what people fail to take in is that when Michael joined Ferrari, he didn't win championships with them straight away. It was something they had to build together in a really big restructuring process. And then secondly of all as well, just the love that Michael had for the team, the team spirit that he created as well. When you hear all these stories about him knowing all the mechanics' names off by heart, staying back at the factory until 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, being the first guy in and the last guy out. The kind of emphasis he put on physical well-being and like physical fitness, which now is a standard in Formula One, but at the time, was completely different. People still lived a kind of almost James Hunt like kind of easy lifestyle away from the track. So
Well, I mean, the thing is, his teammate was Eddie Irvine, so there's a comparison right there.
yeah, Eddie like yachts and a bit of wine and champagne afterwards, whereas with
Yeah,
Michael he was trying to.
I mean, weirdly, it's that thing when the pair of them first joined Ferrari in a, I hesitate to say a backhanded kind of way, but I actually sort of preferred Eddie to Michael just because I found him more interesting. I would never ever want to go for a drink with Eddie Irvine. I couldn't, you know? But when you see them on the screen as a personality, when you read the book or whatever, he's visually a more entertaining character. But I mean, I used to have a documentary about him for the 1999 season when obviously Michael had his accident and Eddie suddenly found himself like leading the championship and fighting for the title. I had a book of his as well from like 1996, Green Races Red, I think it was. And he was just a very enigmatic, no given character. Uh, and so, he was a very entertaining and interesting individual, but I'm not sure I'd ever want to meet him.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would probably say the same as well, David. Like he's a very kind of vibrant character, as you mentioned as well. And to be fair with Eddie, it was always interesting because there was a
Mm,
racer there, but I just think when you've got somebody like a Michael or a Lewis or a Senna kind of in the other side of the garage in the other kind of like car, you know that you're in for
yeah,
a long day's work. And I think
but
he's just one of those teammates that kind of embraced it and almost didn't go off like bad mouthing Michael in years to come or like trying to stay relevant
but
by, like bringing stuff up about Michael and stuff like that too. He was always very
the thing
respectful.
is, he effectively knew what he was. He knew how quick he was. He knew what Michael could do because he was seeing what he was doing in the same car. What he never really understood about Michael was that to him, Michael had flat out pace straight out of the box. So he never quite understood why Michael would hang around for 4 or 5 hours afterwards trying to find that extra tenth. And maybe that's the main difference between them is that Michael just had that laser focus, and Eddie is an entrepreneur, a businessman, a lover of life. He wanted everything he could possibly get is in his world. Um, and maybe he just didn't have that laser focus that's needed to be like the championship winner. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point as well, David. And again, like, when we speak about drivers like Michael or Jules Villeneuve or Senna or even just other ones like popped into my head as well, I was thinking about Nicky Lauda. Like, they're
Yeah,
almost like that eclipsing star where like they're one in a generation or they're just one that come along every 20 years, every 15 years, and it just completely just, change the face of what the standards in motorsport are, for whatever reason. So, it's so
yeah.
interesting to kind of see that, and to kind of segue into the next question, David, we have to have an honest kind of conversation on the state of the championship and an honest assessment of Ferrari as well. So to kind of set the scene out for the viewers, this year actually I feel Ferrari have made a huge step with the SF75. It's a front running car that competently
Yeah,
challenges up front. Although it's not been without its setbacks in terms of reliability issues, some questionable strategy calls, one or two like driver errors as well. In general, though, David, like, what's your assessment been of the team so far? And if you were the team principal, or if you were in Bonotto's shoes, is there anything you would look to change in relation to how the championships played out so far?
it's difficult to say, to be honest with you, because I think Ferrari have surprised themselves, is
Mm,
what it comes down to. Because obviously 2020 was an absolute disaster. Last season it was like just getting back to being effective and in the midfield. And it's like if what their target from there was, and if what their expectation was that this year they wanted to be fighting for wins, then that's actually mission successful. So it kind of depends a bit on expectation because I think they've almost caught themselves out with how good they've been this year,
mhm.
if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
Uh,
it,
so
it
when Bo-
does.
so when Bonotto comes out with stuff, like how he's kind of happy with what the team have done, compared to what he might have been thinking about what they'd have done this year, depending on what the benchmark and the level was when the new car came out, he's not lying exactly. It's just that we feel like there's a lack of ambition in what he's saying.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point, David. And I think you've kind of like dressed that one quite nicely too, and in a fair way too, because like that's true. If we look at the kind of years of 2020, 2021, obviously when they were set back by the kind of technical directive which kind of sees what they were doing with the engine beforehand, it has been a step up for them, and I think nobody can really take that away from them. But kind of leading into the next question I wanted to put forward to you, David, what
Yeah.
are the ramifications if Chelsea, it's a completely different team, if Ferrari, for example, or I was going to say Ferrari correctly, what
Not
are the
even the right
ramifications?
color, man.
I know, right? I know. Red and blue, there's always a rivalry there, but yeah, like what are the ramifications for Ferrari if they don't succeed in winning either the drivers or constructors championship this year? Because you'll get some out there that will say, well, they've got the tools, they've got a foundation to mount a challenge to Red Bull. And on top of that as well, another thing that we could probably take into account too is that this year it really seems that those two teams are out at the front. I mean, Mercedes have really had
Yeah.
to catch their tails and should have done better, and only now really starting to show signs of improvement. And then if you're looking at the future as well, David, like I think the front fight might even get a bit tighter, hopefully, because McLaren are in that process of like developing a new wind tunnel and bringing a more up to date simulator as well that could probably you know increase their performances in the future. You also got the likes of Aston Martin with we like to call him Big Daddy Lawrence Stroll that likes to spend a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
money, on kind of like
Yeah.
the kind of progression of the team and so forth too. Alonso is going to
Yeah.
be going there next season as well. I'm skeptical that he would go there, and not kind of go there with an ambition to fight for a championship or get wins.
Well,
So
the thing is, Lawrence Stroll is ambitious, and Alonso responds to that kind of thing, you know.
true.
So, but
But with
no,
that in mind though,
the
David, like,
yeah,
yeah, because I was gonna say,
the
like,
new regs and stuff are exactly designed so that with the budget cap, with the changes in like where you finish in the championship, giving you more wind tunnel time and stuff, it's designed to over the course of a few years close the pack up.
mhm,
And obviously, you've said yourself, McLaren have got new stuff coming online. Aston Martin are massively handicapped by COVID, of course, because that basically stopped them dead with their plans for their new factory and stuff. Where they're at currently is that they've expanded their workforce by about 400 people or something stupid. And that all takes time to integrate and stuff and come together. So, have they looked brilliant this year? No, not particularly, but it's still sort of in the genesis forming stage at the minute, that team. Given a couple of seasons, they're going to be, they've got a good budget, they've got good staffing levels, they're going to have a brand new factory, you know, they'll be in a very good place.
exactly that, David. And I'm glad that you kind of expanded on that point too, because setting the scene, then, if there was a chance for Ferrari to win a championship, this would seem like the golden year if we know that in the future it's going to probably become a lot more tight, a lot more challenging. And then if you look at recent history as well, obviously I think when Seb was there was a huge fight between him and Lewis. Unfortunately,
Mm.
it didn't quite come to fruition back then. There was also a kind of period with Fernando Alonso, 2013, 14, 12 as well. Didn't quite
Yeah.
happen. And then obviously you'd have to go all the way back to like 2007 when Kimi Raikkonen did it to kind of look at Ferrari dominating a sport, and probably before that to Michael, to see them,
Well, we
on.
haven't dominated since 2004. Obviously, we won the title in 2007, but that was more due to McLaren giving the game away.
True.
2008, arguably, we could have won both, but just didn't quite play out that way. Did take the constructors, of course, though. But that's partly due to a better balanced driver lineup. And I love Heikki Kovalainen, but being Lewis's teammate clearly did a number on him is all I can really say on that one.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, some people can react well to like, well, the driver next to me something special, so I'm going to drive at this level and do my best for the team or whatever. And some people it can get in their heads a bit. And I think with Heikki, he's basically said himself that he found it difficult. Um,
Uh,
but I like Heikki, but he's if you compared the driver lineups, that Ferrari had the edge, I think.
Absolutely. And in relation to that, you guys have got Charles, you guys have got Science as well, two like very strong fighters. In a way, I think they're two drivers that complement each other in different ways. For me, like Leclerc is almost very Joe Villeneuve like in terms of just raw talent and ability, and the way that he will rag the neck of a car and get every
Yeah,
single temp out of it. Where in terms of science, he almost reminds me a bit more like Prost, a bit more like Lauda, a bit even more like Michael in terms of he's very calculated. Sometimes the team will make suggestions and you'll come back and kind of say, well, I appreciate that, but I kind of see things differently. I want to try this. Can we try this? And you see him all the time going with his own direction, and it's paid dividends. And for example, in terms of Silverstone, which I think was one of the most spiciest races of the season, but also as well in Monaco, had it not been for those damn pesky Williams, I think particularly Albon as well, ignoring like 90 blue flags, that might have been Science's day as well, because I believe that
yeah.
I think it was Perez that just amount, like literally about like literally got ahead of him as they're coming out of the pit exit as well. So it's been interesting. I think Ferrari definitely do have a strong lineup for the current and also for
Yeah.
the future. But kind of going back to
Well,
the question as well, David, like should
yeah.
Ferrari continue to pursue this championship? Is it possible for them to still like fight in this title fight with Red Bull? Or at this stage, do you look at it and say maybe it's better to divert some attention to next year?
The thing is, to a certain extent, the rules are relatively stable for next year. So anything they put on this year's car, in theory, if next year's car's evolution, not revolution, which with budget caps and stuff, c- I don't see people taking the big risks and like starting afresh with new ideas and stuff quite so much as they might have done.
Sure.
Um, they could still learn a lot this year that will be applicable, I'd have thought, to next year. Um, the driver lineup's an interesting one. I mean, I've always said like the pair of them have different strengths, they complement each other well. But the whole thing with Carlos, his relationship with the team and him him sort of going, no, I want to do this, and the team backing it rather than necessarily sticking to plan A or whatever, which quite often seems to then compromise Charles. The worry I've got is that ending up being somewhat like 1982, because that season obviously it's not a happy one. Um, how many times will necessarily Ferrari call a strategy thing? Carlos go, no, I don't want to do that, and Charles lose out because of it before Charles gets a bit fed up with it. And the other thing is, it's a tinfoil theory, to be honest with you, but people talk about voices and like in ears
We
and
like
stuff in
theories, David.
boardrooms and stuff.
We love theories.
Carlos,
So yeah,
Carlos, of course, is Spanish, and Ferrari's big sponsor this year,
Santander.
Santander.
Yeah.
So that Carlos does seem to, the way Ferrari have talked about the team, sometimes get more of sort of like almost the management support. It's like Charles, from a fan perspective, and from I suspect that in the mechanics perspective to a certain extent, certainly obviously on his own side, is very much a fan favourite. But it's the same with like Gilles Villeneuve to a certain extent, you know. Enzo loved him, the fans loved him, the mechanics mostly loved him, but the guys in the race team were totally inside of Didier Pironi. To the point where the team boss was Didier Pironi's best man at his wedding, and despite Didier saying that he and Gilles were friends, he didn't even invite Gilles, you know? So it can go badly wrong very quickly when you've got that kind of dynamic.
That's true. And then, I know that people like meme and kind of make jokes and stuff like that. And, it's in light-hearted humor most of the time. But in relation to that, Dave, do you think that Ferrari maybe do need to kind of look at how they go about strategy? Maybe, I don't know if it's a case of recruiting new people. I don't know if it's a case where maybe they're a bit relaxed, because you mentioned with Bonotto too, he's very kind of complimentary of the team all the time. And to me, almost, whereas I think Arriva Bene would chuck people underneath the bus and was very kind of vocal and was kind of typical Ferrari team principle. The way I see Bonotto is he's a bit more nurturing, and he kind of adopts more of Toto Wolff's approach, which is a no blame culture, and this kind of like, okay, this is not the result we wanted, but I'm optimistic and this is what we're going to do for the future. How do you see that?
Um, Well, I say I'm not in the Ferrari factory, so I don't necessarily, you don't know how
Not the
the
final
teams are
word.
managed. You can guess, or you can go on what you've heard.
Mhm.
What I heard pretty much about Arriva Bene was basically that, while things were going good, he was very like happy to talk to people and whatever else. But when things started going wrong, he'd just shut down to the press altogether, and there was always this culture of suspicion and blame going on there, um, which obviously is insidious because it then eats on itself and just you can't build anything or like enjoy anything. Um, Whereas Bonotto and with the Ferrari presidency have backed him on this. Obviously, they've worked very very hard to try and get like rid of the blame culture and whatever, and try to be more encouraging. I mean, Bonotto's an engineer by trade. He was there in the days when Ross Brawn was there. So, the whole Ross Brawn almost ethos and culture and whatever else is what, in theory, I think he's trying to bring to it. But it's like you feel like he's learnt certain lessons, but not the other ones. Because, Ross knew that basically you had to have your stuff plans sorted and ready and stuff and ready to go. And, by Friday, you knew whether you were winning the race or not on Sunday, pretty much.
Absolutely,
And
there. Mhm.
he just, he doesn't have like doesn't seem to have like the ruthlessness streak or whatever else that he needs to. He's not a politician. Um, Back in the days, when we talk about like the dream team so much, Michael Schumacher, you know, all of that lot. At the back of them all, you always had my brain's going because
It's okay.
politically there was always like a strong person to deal with the rest of the Piranha Club, so the team members could get on with being the team members. And it feels very much like in the last few years where Ferrari have lost out has been on the political side of it, which ironically is the side they always used to be seen to do quite well on. They just there's a lack of slickness everywhere to a certain extent. They don't seem to be winning in the boardroom to like the percentage stuff to turn things to their advantage in like the manner that they might have done in the past. It's like Ross Brawn had a whole team going on planning on, how we can work with this, how we can make this work, how we can change that to our advantage or whatever. And Ferrari these days just seem to lack that. Trying to think what the word is. Just like there's not an assassin there. For want
I
of a
think,
better way of putting it.
yeah, I definitely hear that, David, and I think that's a fair point too. Like it's that kind of cutting edge and that almost dark side of the moon. Shout out to Pink Floyd, in
Yeah.
relation to like
Oh,
just that
why
kind of
not?
like, yeah, exactly. But I definitely, I think I get that too. Because especially like how we mentioned with McLaren, even though Ron Dennis was not like the president of McLaren, just as a team principal, you could see just that very like when things were going well, he was just happy and very kind of just like modest. But then when things were not going so well, you could actively see him, like grabbing
But
people, having some very deep conversations, which I wouldn't want to be the epicenter of. That's for sure.
I mean,
And yeah,
that's something the sport seems to miss these days is the likes of Ron Dennis and Luca de Montezemolo, sort of like the old Piranha Club.
sure, and even with Luca Montezemolo as well, like David, you mentioned, just like I remember that Ferrari documentary. He mentioned, when you drive for Ferrari, you don't just drive like, like for the team. You're driving like for the country, and you drive for the
Right.
badge, you drive for the mechanics, and you drive for the culture. So it's not just like driving Ferrari, and not anybody can just drive a Ferrari. So I definitely see that point as well, David. And I think that's a really good and fair analysis. And I think we don't always have to kind of grill Ferrari. To me, actually, I feel bad because it's a team I always had affinity to growing up during that Michael Schumacher era too. But I think we've had an honest assessment about it too, in terms of just like
It's
where they currently are. Mhm.
and the thing is, the problem with Ferrari is we say we've got rid of like the blame culture and stuff, but it's almost gone too much the other way. It's like the lesson is there to be learned, but no one's almost willing to learn it. So you've got, I mean, this year we've got the car to win the title. The car was there to win the title, and it's now practically impossible. I can't, Max would have to have the worst run of luck in history, I think, at this point for us to really be in a shout. Um, but the car was there. And if it had have just been driver error, would have still been within a shout. Between driver error, strategy error, and breakdowns, we've cost Charles 80 odd points plus. And even if you took one of them three things away, bearing in mind his results and improved finishes would take points off where Max was. Even if we had the unreliability, would still be well in the title fight easily. Um, but what's really pained us and panned us is the strategy because yeah, the car is there. There's talented drivers. There's so much good things to look at when you look at Ferrari than there genuinely are. But there's a lack of slickness. You know, you we've gone out for a Sunday drive, Red Bull go to war. That's almost the difference how it feels. You know, we do strategy seemingly by committee, whereas they're just like, "No, we're doing this," and they're always pushing it. You know, any move they think they can make to put the pressure on, Red Bull do it. Um, I think the closest analogy I've got between the two teams and why we've struggled so much to be able to live with them this year, and this is going to pain you, so I apologise for bringing it up. Abu Dhabi last year.
Mm.
If Max had been driving for a Ferrari, Lewis would have still won that race
It's actually really deep
because
when you think about it. Yeah.
that whole race, Red Bull were using everything they could. You know, they didn't quite have the car that day. You know, it happens. But Max was driving it as hard as he could. Every strategic option